30 years ago, a love story unfolded on the silver screen that made the whole world believe in fairy tales again. It wasn't about perfect people or perfect circumstances. It was about two souls finding each other against all odds. And now, after decades of wondering what became of them, the magic is stirring again. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere are stepping back into the light, their eyes meeting once more, and for millions of fans, it feels like a piece of the past has come back to life. It began on the bustling streets of Los Angeles, in a time when dreams seemed as fragile as they were powerful. Vivian Ward was a woman trying to survive in a city that could be both dazzling and cruel. She wasn't polished, she wasn't from a world of silk and chandeliers, yet she carried something rare. Beneath the sparkle of her smile was a vulnerability that no one ever stopped long enough to see. That is, until Edward Lewis arrived. Edward was the kind of man who lived in skyscrapers and boardrooms. His life was ruled by schedules, numbers, and deals. Romance wasn't part of his plan, it was an inconvenience in the world he had built for himself. But fate, as it often does, stepped in quietly and without warning, a wrong turn, a chance encounter. And suddenly, two very different lives collided. In the most unexpected way. Their first meeting wasn't some grand, cinematic moment. It was awkward, messy, and nothing like the love stories Edward was used to hearing about. Vivian, with her sharp wit and bold honesty, didn't fit into his world. And yet, that was exactly what made her unforgettable. She didn't try to impress him, didn't pretend to be anyone else. For a man surrounded by people who spoke in careful lies, her truth was a jolt of fresh air. Over the days that followed, something began to change. Edward saw in Vivian a kind of courage he didn't recognize in himself. She faced life head-on, even when it tried to crush her. She laughed loudly, lived fully, and refused to let shame dictate her worth. In her presence, the walls Edward had built around his heart began to crumble. Vivian, on the other hand, found herself stepping into a world she had only seen from a distance, a world of elegance and power, but also a world that could look down on someone like her without hesitation. It wasn't an easy journey. The streets had taught Vivian to keep her guard up, and Edward's world had taught him to keep his emotions locked away. There were misunderstandings, arguments, and moments when it seemed like they were too different to last. But somehow, through every clash and every quiet moment in between, the two kept finding their way back to each other. By the time Edward stood outside her apartment in that white limousine, climbing up to her balcony despite his fear of heights, it was clear this wasn't just a fling. This was the kind of love that refused to fit into anyone's expectations. It was messy, inconvenient, and utterly real. Vivian had shown Edward what it meant to truly live, and Edward had shown Vivian that she deserved the kind of love that doesn't fade when the night is over, when the credits rolled. It felt like the fairy tale had reached its happy ending. But for fans, the question lingered like an unspoken promise. What happened after the fairy tale? Did they build a life together, or did reality pull them apart? For years, those questions remained unanswered, until now, when whispers of a reunion have begun to spread. And with each whisper, the hope that the magic might return grows stronger. It started like all great rumors, not with an official announcement, not with a flashy trailer or a press release, but with something small, something that felt almost accidental. A grainy photo appeared online, captured by someone who had been in the right place at the right time. Julia Roberts, radiant as ever, and Richard Gere, with that same calm warmth in his smile, were seen walking side by side outside a quiet studio in Los Angeles. There was no red carpet, no flashing cameras, just two people, laughing softly like old friends who shared a secret the rest of the world wasn't in on. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Fans had been burned before. Over the years, there had been whispers of a Pretty Woman sequel that never came to life. False starts, unconfirmed scripts, and ideas that faded into nothing. But this felt different. The way they leaned toward each other, the easy rhythm of their steps, the way Julia's hand brushed his arm, it wasn't the stiff politeness of two actors reuniting for a publicity event. This looked real, like something was happening. Then came the second clue. A week later, an interview surfaced where a reporter casually asked Julia about working with Richard again. She smiled, a smile that carried the weight of knowing more than she could say. "We've always had a special connection," she replied. "Some stories, they're not done yet." It was the kind of answer that set the internet on fire. Soon? Entertainment blogs were dissecting every word, every glance, every supposed leak from insiders. Some claimed that a new script had been written, a continuation of Vivian and Edward's love story, set in the present day. Others insisted it wasn't a sequel at all, but a brand new romantic drama, one that would reunite Roberts and Gere on screen for the first time in decades. The truth remained a mystery, but the idea alone was enough to send waves of excitement through Hollywood and beyond. Social media became a shrine to possibility. Fans posted side-by-side photos of the couple from 1990 and now, marveling at how their chemistry seemed untouched by time. Memes appeared, captions declaring, "The fairy tale continues." Hashtags like #PrettyWoman2 and #Vivian and Edward Forever began trending. People who hadn't thought about the film in years were suddenly remembering the way it made them feel, the hope, the laughter, the way it made them believe that love could change everything. But beyond the noise of speculation, there was something quieter at work. For Julia and Richard, this wasn't just about stepping into the roles that had made them icons. It was about revisiting a moment in time that had shaped their careers and perhaps shaped them as people. Both had gone on to live full, complex lives, other films, other loves, other challenges. And yet, when they looked at each other now, it was as though no time had passed. The connection that had carried them through long days on set 3 decades ago still pulsed beneath the surface. Alive and undeniable. Industry insiders whispered that there had been several private meetings over the past year, sessions with writers, conversations with producers, even a quiet dinner with the original director, Gary Marshall's protege, who had been tasked with capturing the same magic without repeating the past. The challenge was clear. If they were going to do this, it had to be worth it. It had to honor the story fans had carried in their hearts for 30 years, while giving them something new, something that could stand on its own, and so the city began to buzz. Not in loud, obvious ways, but in the subtle hum of expectation. A coffee shop barista swore she'd overheard a conversation about Edward and Vivian's apartment set being rebuilt. A costume designer posted a photo of a red gown sketch only to delete it minutes later. A cinematographer was spotted leaving the same studio Julia and Richard had been seen entering. Little pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, though. No one could yet see the full picture. For fans, each hint was a spark, and together those sparks were becoming a fire. This wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about closure. About finding out if the fairy tale that had begun in a Beverly Hills penthouse had survived the years in between. And as more signs began to appear, the line between rumor and reality grew thinner, until it was almost impossible to tell where one ended and the other began, because deep down, everyone wanted to believe. The studio gates were closed, the windows covered with black screens, and the signs outside the sound stages bore fake production names meant to throw curious onlookers off the scent. But in Hollywood, secrets are as fragile as they are precious, and whispers have a way of slipping through the cracks. Somewhere inside those guarded walls, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere were stepping back into a world they had left decades ago. At first, it was nothing more than set designers and carpenters at work. But when a photograph surfaced of a half-built balcony, the same kind Vivian had leaned over when Edward arrived in that white limousine, fans began to realize this wasn't just a casual reunion. This was her balcony. The one where the fairy tale paused, not ended. The one where promises were made without words. And if the balcony was back, then maybe, just maybe, the love story was too. Inside, the buzz was electric. Writers sat hunched over laptops, not just reimagining the past, but threading a bridge from yesterday to today. How would Vivian and Edward's lives have unfolded? After the limousine drove away, would they have married? Had children? Faced heartbreak? The challenge wasn't just about writing a script, it was about respecting 3 decades of fan imagination. Everyone who had ever loved Pretty Woman already had their own ending in mind. This new chapter had to feel like the ending, the one that finally belonged to everyone. The rumors about the plot were as varied as they were passionate. Some claimed the story would pick up exactly 30 years later, with Edward a retired businessman, and Vivian running her own thriving fashion line, the echoes of her street days only visible in the fierce independence she carried. Others believed it would be a story of reunion after years apart, a love that had slipped through their fingers once, only to return when life had stripped away everything else. And there were bolder theories still, a twist that would challenge everything we thought we knew about their fairy tale. Even the crew couldn't hide their excitement. A lighting technician was overheard telling a friend that the first table read between Julia and Richard had been like watching two old flames recognize each other after a lifetime apart. The pauses, the stolen glances, the laughter between lines, it was as if they had been waiting years for this moment. The kind of chemistry you can't fake, the kind that doesn't fade no matter how much time passes. Costume designers had their own secrets to guard. The most whispered about piece wasn't the iconic red gown or the knee-high boots, it was something new. Something that insiders said would mirror the past but carry the weight of the years between. A dress that wasn't about seduction, but about history. A single look at it, they promised, would tell fans everything about the woman Vivian had become. The director, too, carried the weight of expectation. Stepping into Gary Marshall's shoes was no small task, and those close to the project said he approached the film with reverence, refusing to rush a single scene. If it doesn't make people feel something deep in their chest, he was rumored to have said, it doesn't go in the movie. Even with all the secrecy, small moments leaked out, moments that fueled the fire. Julia and Richard spotted walking through the backlot, holding hands between takes. A piano on set, with speculation that Edward might once again play for Vivian. A glimpse of a script page with the words, "I never stopped looking for you." Outside the studio, the world was watching. News anchors debated the possible storyline. Magazines devoted cover spreads to what we want to see in Pretty Woman 2, and in coffee shops, offices, and living rooms, fans shared their own predictions, some hopeful, some heartbreaking. But inside the gates, where the air smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh paint, and the sound of hammers echoed through the halls, something undeniable was taking shape. Not just a sequel, not just a reunion, but a promise silent and powerful that the fairy tale wasn't over. That maybe, after all these years, love still had one last chapter left to tell. Asterisk, there is something strange about memory. It doesn't just store the past. It breathes life into it when the right moment comes along. For many, Pretty Woman wasn't just a film, it was a chapter of their own lives. Some saw it as the spark that made them believe in unexpected love, others as a reminder that kindness can change everything. And now, as the reunion edges closer to reality, those old emotions are waking up again. For Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, stepping back into these roles is more than a professional challenge. It's a return to a place that shaped them in ways they might never have fully realized at the time. 30 years ago, they were two actors chasing a story. Now they are two people carrying decades of life behind them, love, loss, triumphs, regrets, all of it seeping quietly into the way they speak each line, the way they look at each other. It's no longer just acting. It's lived experience on set. The atmosphere is unlike any other project either of them has worked on in recent years. Between takes, they share quiet jokes, but sometimes there are long silences too. Silences heavy with meaning where a simple look seems to say, "We know these characters better now because we've lived a little more like them." Crew members have described moments where the energy in the room shifts, when the cameras roll and the world outside seems to disappear. It's as though Vivian and Edward never left. They simply waited for the right moment to step back into the light. The legacy of their story is not lost on anyone involved. Letters from fans, some decades old, have been passed around the set. Stories of people who met their partners after watching the film together, of couples who walked out of the theater 30 years ago and promised they'd grow old side by side. One letter, written by a woman in her 70s, told of how she watched Pretty Woman during a difficult time in her life and how it gave her hope when she thought hope was gone. Now, she wrote, she would live to see Edward and Vivian again, and in some way, it felt like seeing an old friend. This is the weight the sequel carries. It isn't just about two fictional characters, it's about the people who carried them in their hearts for decades. It's about the way a single story can become part of someone's own. The filmmakers know this, and so does the cast. Every scene, every line is treated not just as a moment in a movie, but as a message to the millions who've been waiting. All these years, we remember too, and yet for all the emotion and nostalgia, there is a determination to give the audience something new. This is not a replay of the past, it's an evolution. Time changes people, it deepens them, hardens some edges, softens others. Vivian is no longer the young woman trying to find her footing. She's a woman who's built her own life, faced her own storms, and learned how to stand tall in any room. Edward is no longer the man afraid to let anyone in. He's a man who's learned what matters, and what he's willing to risk for it. Those who have seen early footage say, there are moments that will make audiences smile the way they did 30 years ago, and moments that will break their hearts in ways they didn't expect. The reunion isn't painted in pure fantasy this time. It's grounded in reality, in the bittersweet truth that life is rarely a straight path. Sometimes the people we love are with us through it all. Sometimes they leave, and sometimes, if fate is kind, they return. As filming moves toward its final days, there is a growing sense among the cast and crew that they are part of something bigger than themselves. Not just a film, not just a sequel, but a farewell letter to the past and a love letter to the future. A story that says, you can lose years, you can lose your way, but if the connection is real, it will wait for you. When the curtain finally rises and the first trailer plays, the world will see them again, not just as Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, not even just as Vivian and Edward, but as two people proving that some stories never really end. They simply pause, waiting for the right moment to begin again. And in that moment, as the screen fills with their faces and their eyes meet once more, millions will feel it. The heart remembers. The day the final scene was shot, the air on set felt different, thicker, charged, as if everyone knew they were capturing something that wouldn't happen again. The lights were warm, the camera silent for a brief moment before rolling, and Julia and Richard stood across from each other in character, but with something undeniably real flickering in their eyes. No one but the director knew exactly how the scene would end. The script had been kept deliberately vague, leaving the final lines unwritten until the morning of the shoot. It was a gamble-led decision to let instinct and emotion, not the page, guide the moment. Richard, as Edward, stepped forward. Julia, as Vivian, didn't move. The distance between them was small, but it carried 30 years of history. 30 years of questions that had never been answered. He spoke first softly, almost like he was afraid to break the spell. I looked for you, he said, each word heavy. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, as if trying to see the man she had known in the man standing before her now. Finally, her voice came, steady but thick with unspoken truths. You didn't have to. I was always here. The camera didn't cut. They stood there, letting the silence do the work, letting their faces tell the rest of the story. And then, slowly, Edward reached for her hand. It was an action so simple, so quiet, yet it carried the weight of decades. Her fingers slipped into his, and in that moment, it didn't matter if the world had changed around them. Some things, some loves, survive everything. The director called cut, but no one moved. Julia and Richard stayed in place, their hands still joined, as if neither of them wanted to let go just yet. The crew, usually quick to reset for the next shot, stood frozen, watching something that felt bigger than fiction. Later, when the scene was reviewed in the editing room, one of the producers whispered, "This isn't just the ending of a film. This is the ending people have been waiting 30 years for." But here's the thing, maybe it's not the ending at all. The footage is locked away for now, the last few minutes of the movie guarded more fiercely than any secret in Hollywood. Even the teaser trailer, set to drop in a few months, cuts away before the final moment, leaving only a glimpse. Edward's hand reaching out, Vivian's face breaking into a smile. Just as the screen fades to black dot, it's deliberate. It's cruel. And it's perfect. Because this isn't just about telling a story, it's about making the audience feel the same ache, the same hope that Edward and Vivian have carried all these years. When the movie finally releases, there will be gasps, tears, and maybe even cheers in theaters. People will walk out holding hands, calling old friends, or texting someone they haven't spoken to in years. Because Pretty Woman was never just a love story, it was a reminder that even in a world full of sharp edges, there are still moments of pure, uncheckable connection, and so the promise remains. Not just between two characters, but between the story and the audience. A promise that says, love might be delayed, it might be tested, but if it's real, it will always find its way back. And when it does, it will be worth the wait. Now, as the world waits for the lights to dim and the curtain to rise once more, the question hangs in the air, will Vivian and Edward's fairy tale truly come full circle? Or will they remind us that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that dare to leave us wanting more? Because somewhere behind those studio doors and under the glow of that final spotlight, a love that began on a Hollywood street has found its way home. And for those who've been waiting 3 long decades, the heart already knows the answer.